Welcome back to the Andrew and Ian Show. I'm Andrew Serwick here again with Ian. Hi, Ian. We're gonna talk all college football today, but how you doing this evening, man?
Not too bad. Yeah, the Tigers won pretty big today, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, 15-1 Tigers, man. It's weird seeing the Tigers score more than like 5 or 6 runs, but anyways, real quick before we get started here, I just want to brush real quick. JJ McCarthy, RIP. Yeah, torn meniscus, suffered in this week's preseason game. So, yeah, he's going to be sitting for quite a while now. And I was going to say he should probably sit the first few weeks of the season, but yeah, now he kind of has to sit the first few weeks of the season, and probably more because they don't have a recovery map worked out yet just for him. But yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. But anyways, we're gonna get into the Big Ten preview. We aren't gonna play the schedule game like we did last week. We're kind of just gonna gauge instead of going game by game because yeah, it just took way too long. And then but first we're gonna go over the AP poll. First AP the preseason poll for college football here. And but before we actually dive into this, Ian, I just kind of want to get your thoughts on this. Me personally, I don't like the AP poll in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season, and especially preseason, because to me you can't really tell what a team is gonna be in the preseason or even before the season starts, before camp starts, all that shit. And that's why I don't like the preseason poll, especially because you don't know how good these teams are really going to be this year. And we'll get into this because there's a lot of teams in this top 25 right now that I don't think are gonna be there after the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season, because again, you can't really tell what a team is until they've played 3-4 games. And I kind of want your thoughts on that. Like, do you kind of see it that way, or do you have a different thought on it?
There's a couple teams that I'm kind of iffy on. Like, they're more later on in the rankings, not so much as the higher up. I don't really see any issues where like, yo, they shouldn't really be in the rankings, period. But like later on, like once you get past, or into the double digits of the rankings, then I see a couple teams almost immediately that I'm like, I can see you dropping out because, like you said, preseason AP poll almost seems like a little bit of name bias every year.
Yeah, and that's the one thing is like yeah, I think we can all agree. Georgia at number one. We very much think they're the best team in the country, but I mean, honestly, you can make an argument for OSU and Oregon too, to be at that number one spot, and it's just like you can't really tell what these teams are before the season even starts, let alone after even week one. I mean, I think it takes a lot more than 2 or 3 games to really know what a team is. So I've always said, the poll should start at week four. Right before week four starts, drop the poll, and we just go from there. Because again, you don't know who these teams are. Who, for all we know, what if Georgia's fucking garbage this year? And now this preseason poll is a clown car. Not I highly doubt it's gonna happen, but it's possible, right?
I mean, yeah, slim possibility for everything. But, the only argument I can really see is, or against it rather, is, Oregon, they're swapping, from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. They have a division jump. That's going to be a little tougher. So will they still be at, top three by the end of the season? I don't know. And I might give them a little more slack because they're going from, the Pac-12 with the horrendous defenses, and we all know that, to the Big Ten with teams like Iowa who are all defense, zero offense. So it's a different animal, but I guess we'll just have to see later on. But like you said, give them a few games before you just start throwing rankings and inflating the players' egos, because that just gets in the players' heads, and they start losing performance and whatnot because
Right.
they get in their heads and the ego gets to them and all that.
Yeah, and
Let them play ball for a little bit, and then try and institute all of that.
I mean, like, look at was Colorado ranked to start the season last year, or am I thinking something else?
I don't know if they were
But
immediately ranked to start, but they
no, no,
won two games
they
to get ranked,
beat TCU and they got
to be
ranked.
ranked. Yeah,
Yes, yeah, and TCU last year was only ranked because of where they finished the year prior, and
fell off.
they fell off and they were horrible. But let's get into this here in the top 25. We're gonna start with this bottom five here, um, and we'll kind of work our way up. So right now we got Iowa at 25, NC State at 24, USC 23, Kansas at 22, and Arizona at 21. Um, I have a few issues here. I don't know how good NC State's really going to be. I know they picked up last season, and their offseason, I heard, was fairly solid, so maybe. But here's an interesting stat with Iowa. Um, so I want you to guess, okay, how many teams um, with so Iowa had a historically bad offense last year, right? Averaging one touchdown per game. Uh, Literally, they had just as many touchdowns as they played games on the offensive side of the ball last year. What do you think the average win total for teams with offenses that are in that same realm of of what Iowa's offense is like? How many average wins do you think that teams like that have had?
Oh no, I'll give them credit of the good old EMU teams. We'll give them a good 2 wins on average.
Yeah, the average for a team that averages just one touchdown per game on offense, the average is 2.7. Iowa had 10 wins last year. That's how good Iowa's defense is. Um, I their offense, we don't know what their offense is going to be this year, but that defense is going to be scary good. They lost quite a bit to the draft, but they just replenished, and boy, that defense is going to be really good. I don't know if they're going to stay in this top 25 though this year. I really, really don't, just because we don't know what that offense is. USC, well, we know they can't tackle, and they don't have Caleb Williams anymore, so USC I could see dropping out fairly quickly here. Kansas could stay. Arizona, same thing. Uh, what do you take on this first group of five here?
Yeah, I feel like I share pretty much the same sentiment on most of these teams. Like Iowa, I feel like personally has the best chance because of how baller that defense is. And then if the offense can show, a modicum of improvement, say instead of averaging, a touchdown per game, they're averaging like two or, something like that. Just slightly better on, offense. That would be and they won 10 games last year. To improve upon 10 games, you're winning 11 or 12. That's, you're flirting with the perfect season. So, I mean, I don't think Iowa's going to be doing that. And especially, like I said, with all of these teams coming over from the Pac-12, with these high-flying offenses that they have to now compete with directly, it's going to be a matter of you have an unstoppable force and an immovable object coming together, and who's going to win.
Yeah, and it's going to be a harder schedule for Iowa this year too, with having to play teams. I believe they do play Oregon at some point this year, but yeah, it's just going to be a tougher season for Iowa this year. And the defense, we know that they can handle it. It's just that offense is the question mark. So moving on up here into this next group of five, you got Texas A&M at 20, Miami at 19, K-State at 18, Oklahoma State at 17, and Oklahoma at 16. Oklahoma should not be where they are. They really, really should not be. I don't think they'd be a top 20. I don't think they're going to be a top 25 team come week 4 or week 5. I really, really don't, and I think it's going to stay that way the rest of the season. They are not prepared for the SEC this year at all on both sides of the ball, and I think Texas A&M, they're overrated, but I think they can stay in this top 25. But the only one I really gotta argue in this group right here is Oklahoma at 16. I think they're way too high, and there's so many question marks. Like they're gonna fall out of this top 25 very fast.
Yeah, and seeing some of the news that came out today from Oklahoma that they lost wide receiver Jaden Gibson with a knee injury for the season. So they already took a big hit, and they're at 16. Like, and we predicted them to not to have a very poor season this year, just based on their schedule. So and like you said, I also agreed. I don't think they're prepared for the SEC, so we will see them very quickly drop off because they're no longer playing teams like Kansas. They're no longer playing teams, from the Big 12 or in getting, the comparable schedule of a Big 12 team. They're playing the SEC teams and the SEC dogs, and they're not going to get ready. And they're not going to be ready for that.
No, they're really not. I mean, I would definitely put Oklahoma State and Kansas State above this Oklahoma team. Hell, I'd even put Miami and Texas A&M, and I'm not high on either of those two schools either. Especially Miami, I'm not high on them. And that's where like we kind of go back to what you said a little bit earlier. It's kind of like a brand name sort of bias to start these AP polls. I mean, and we'll get into it because there's a few schools in the top 10 that I don't think should be in the top 10 at all, and one of them I'm a big fan of. But we'll get there in a second here. But I feel like there's a lot of that just name bias, right now, and yeah, because like Miami, I don't think they're that good. They're going to be a lot better than last year, but they're not that good. And we've already been on Oklahoma, so let's move on up here to this next group. Got Tennessee at 15, Clemson at 14, LSU at 13, who I think should be way higher. Utah at 12, and Missouri at 11 here. I A lot of people are going to be sleeping on Utah this year. Cam Rising's back, and he's healthy. Actually healthy this time. We kept hearing all last year where he said, "Oh, he'll be back soon. Oh, he'll be back soon," and he never came back. Cam Rising, he's going to be back. He's going to be healthy, hopefully. And I mean, he's a really good quarterback, and I think he can definitely lead this Utah team to a win in the Big 12, to winning the Big 12, I should say. And I like them. I would probably put them ahead of Missouri, but Missouri has a lot going for them this year too. But I really think LSU should be a lot higher and should be up in the top 10 for sure. 13, I feel like is just way too low for them because yes, we don't know the quarterback situation, but they still have a ton of talent.
You're right, and let's say that this area is really where I started to have the issues because, like Clemson, the past few years, we've seen them ranked at the start of the season and then they've fallen off. So seeing them at 14 is kind of like, all right, they're not, ranked in the top 10, but are they good enough for that 14 ranking?
I think they are. I think Clemson is. I do. I think you could probably put Tennessee ahead of them, but I think 14, 15 is a good spot for Clemson. I mean, that's where they roughly finished last year with their record, and yes, it'd be missing the playoffs this year, and I don't think they're necessarily a playoff team, but I think to start the season, again, I hate the preseason poll, but from what I've kind of just gathered from this offseason, I feel like Clemson could be right around there all season long.
It's a fair judgment. But like you said, with LSU and Utah, I feel like, and even Mizzou, they could all be warranted for top 10 teams.
Yeah, I feel like LSU is definitely going to be a playoff team this year. I mean, again, we don't know. I mean, we were high on them on Tuesday's episode last week. Playing the schedule game with them, but I think realistically, yeah. It is possible that they don't have a good season. I mean, the schedule says they will, but again, we don't know the quarterback situation right now in LSU, how good their quarterback is going to be with the departure of Daniels, and plus, they lost some of their, they lost their two best receivers, but still, I think LSU is going to be really good here. Moving on here to now into the top 10, you have Florida State at 10, Michigan at number 9, and we're going to get to them in a second here because, boy. Penn State at 8, Notre Dame at number 7, and Ole Miss at number 6. Let's get right into Michigan here. You lost 19 starters to the NFL this year.
And your head coach.
and you lost your head coach. Yes, Sharon Moore is still there, so there's some sort of continuity at least with the offense. But man, this it's a brand new coaching staff outside of Sharon Moore. Um, and the only player I can think of off the top of my head that's a starter that's returning is Donovan Edwards, and he looked like shit last year up until like the national title game. But Michigan's ranked way too high. I mean, I, I, I think Michigan is at the very best a 9-win team this year. At the very best, I think they're going to go 8-4 personally, but at the very best, they're losing a minimum of 3 games this year, and number 9 is just way too high to start the season. Yes, I know they're the reigning national champs, but fuck's sake, this is just way too high of a ranking for them. And Florida State should be a little bit higher, and I think Ole Miss should be in the top 5.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Michigan that I think they're a little too high. Like I would swap them and Mizzou, have Mizzou in the top 10. Like I like Penn State being where they're at. Like Notre Dame, I don't really know. So they always seem to have a really good team. They always seem to be ranked at the start of the season. So whether or not they're warranted of a 7, we'll see. Ole Miss, like you said before the show, I feel like they could be warranted of a top 5 team over Alabama, but whether or not they're warranted of a top 4 or top 3, that's when you start to really push the envelope for Ole Miss.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Ole Miss's defense last year was straight garbage. They're still going to be bad this year. They're going to be slightly better, but this offense, it got better this offseason. Jackson Dart is a fucking stud of a quarterback. He's a mobile white guy. Like, can you believe it? But man, Ole Miss is going to be scary good on offense this year. They have a lot of returning guys. All their weapons are returning. Most of that offensive line is returning. So I mean, yeah, Ole Miss is going to be scary good. It's just can the defense do just enough to keep them really in the playoffs? They'll more than likely be a playoff team this year. It's just how far can they go, because you need to play defense to win national championships. Look at Michigan last year for further example of that. Best defense in the country, and then the last 2 years before that, Georgia was the best defense in the country, and guess who won the national title? I rest my fucking case. I mean, and it goes back. I mean, if you look at every single national championship in the playoff era, the best defenses in the country have won it, except for the one time where Clemson won it with fucking what's his name that I can't think of now. God damn it.
Trevor Lawrence.
Yes, Trevor Lawrence. Why can't I think of his fucking name? But yeah, they didn't have the best defense, but they had one of the best defenses in the country at the time. But still, it's usually a top 5 defense that wins it, and yeah, so that's going to be the big question for Ole Miss. So going into the top 5 here, got Bama at 5, Texas at 4, Oregon at 3, OSU at 2, and Georgia at number 1. And like I said earlier, we all kind of agree Georgia's going to be the best team this year on both sides of the ball, really, all around. They're a great team. OSU, they are stacked. They are ready to go. But Oregon, I think, is very interesting this year. Yes, they're moving to the Big Ten, but I have Oregon winning the Big Ten this year. Like, that is my pick to win the Big Ten. It'll be probably an Oregon versus OSU game. And, yeah, Oregon, I mean, they are so loaded. Yes, they lost Bo Nix, but they have a really good quarterback coming in this year. They have a lot of starters returning on both sides of the ball. So, yeah, and, like I said, I'd probably put Ole Miss above Bama. I'd probably still put Bama somewhere in the top 10. I'd probably not anywhere near the top 5. I'd probably put them about 7 or 8. I feel like they're going to be good this year, but we don't know how good, especially with Kalen DeBoer's style of offense. We don't know how that's going to work against SEC defenses, but we'll see. And well, like I said all last year, Texas is back.
Yeah, like I 100%. Georgia at one is that's a lock. Ohio State at number two is very much like it's been preached for a while that they have one of, if not the best roster in football. But like again, Georgia always competes. So I'm not even mad that Georgia's at number one because that's like we said, it's pretty much a gimme at that point for even for these top two teams. And then Oregon, my only like I said, my only gripe with them is they're swapping conferences. And that's not really a gripe with the players themselves, that's just circumstances. And are they willing to come to play for those circumstances? We're going to find out. And Texas at four, I feel like I would have been more comfortable seeing Texas at the three spot and then Oregon at four. But I really don't have a gripe seeing Texas in the top five to start because I feel like they're going to end the season right there in the top five in the middle of all of that.
Yeah, and the thing is both with Oregon and Texas, they're both moving to different conferences, and both of them, out of all the teams moving to different conferences, Oregon and Texas are the most prepared for their new conferences. And I mean that's just plain and simple, and that's why I think Oregon very much could win the Big Ten this year, just because again their defense is built to play against these very tough Big Ten offenses, especially of the likes of OSU and Michigan, who love to fucking pound it. And OSU's fucking running back room is going to be ridiculous this year. Um, and Henderson is just he's a fucking moving boulder at 100 miles an hour. Like he's just going to be plowing through everyone. But I think Oregon is very much prepared for the Big Ten. It's just a matter of can their new quarterback step up and fill the role that Bo Nix did last year, and maybe even better, because you don't even need a Bo Nix, or Oregon's team last year probably wouldn't have even needed a Bo Nix to compete in the Big Ten last year. So I don't think they're gonna need it this year either.
Yeah, and that's 100. I could 100% agree with that. Like it's the Big Ten. Like yeah, there are a lot of premier teams at the top. But once you get down to the bottom, you have, the Rutgers, the Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, the list goes on.
UCLA.
I mean, yeah, even some of the incoming additions, like, yeah, USC is, they are ranked currently. Are they going to be ranked later on down the road? Probably not. So am I going to, just throw them into the bottom feeders of the Big Ten immediately? No. You have MSU. You have, Rutgers. You have Maryland. You have all of these teams that are very definition of mid. So Oregon is very well set up to succeed in the Big Ten. And then even against, these teams like Ohio State and Michigan, if they're prepared, with a good defensive line, you're going to have a good time. Now, granted, Ohio State, they don't have, Marvin Harrison Jr. anymore. They still have, some of the best receivers in the game right now. So you can't just stop Ohio State at the line of scrimmage. You have to, have that secondary. You have to be able to prevent them from stretching that field against you. And like you said, Oregon and Texas are the teams that have proven that they can do this. We've seen Texas. They went to Alabama, and they beat them. Texas can play in the SEC. Oklahoma tried to do the same thing. Couldn't do it.
Yeah. Uh, you know, you said it perfectly. Texas, I mean, both these teams are so ready for the new conferences here. So yeah, that's their top 25 your preseason poll. It is what it is. I'm not a fan of the preseason poll still, but whatever makes people happy, I guess. But anyways, let's get into the Big Ten here. They've done away with the Big Ten West, the Big Ten East. It's just the top two teams in the entire Big Ten will now face off against each other in the Big Ten championship game. Which means, one day in the future when Michigan's good again, we could possibly see a Big Ten versus Ohio, or a Michigan versus Ohio State 2 weeks in a row. How about that? But anyways, let's get into the Big Ten here. Obviously, a lot of, we have 4 new additions to the Big Ten this year with USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. But we're kind of gonna go. We're not gonna play the schedule game like we did last week. It just took way too long. So we're just going to kind of go here team by team and just kind of go over who like about where we think they're going to finish in and how many wins we think they're going to finish with as well. Um, so let's go here with Illinois to start. We're going to go in alphabetical order here. So Illinois, um, their schedule's not too difficult this year. Just kind of looking at it, um, they have uh, pretty easy start to the season, and then they play Penn State later on, and then they get to Oregon at some point. But they have a fairly easy schedule. I could see probably 8-9 wins out of Illinois this year. I don't really see them going anything else than that. But yeah, probably about 8 wins this year. They're probably going to drop a couple bad games as well, but overall, I think yeah, because they play Michigan, they play Ohio State, they play Penn State, and they play Oregon. So yeah, probably about 8 wins at the very very most this year for Illinois.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think 8, maybe 9 wins if they decide to upset Kansas in week 2. But I think 8 is a good ceiling for Illinois.
Yeah. So moving on here to Indiana. Um. It's going to be a race to the bottom between Indiana, Purdue, and UCLA. I think this year in the Big Ten. Um,
Man, don't discredit Michigan State now.
no, Michigan State's going to have a lot better season this year, I think, than a lot of people would expect. But yeah, Indiana's going to be so bad this year. I think I saw their over under for wins was like 3.5, and I think 3 wins is probably just about where they're going to finish here. They'll probably beat the group of 5 schools that they play, but I don't see them beating anyone else in conference.
And say, yeah, looking at the schedule, like they have FIU, Western Illinois, and Charlotte just in the first 4 weeks. So that's 3 wins I could probably see them getting. You know, it is what it is if they don't. But like you said, even with UCLA maybe not being the best, I'm assuming they're probably better than Indiana.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the only toss-up game really that Indiana plays this year where they could win is against Purdue. And again, like I said, it's going to be a
That's a
race,
good season.
right? And
Toss
that's
up anyway.
and it's I said it's a race to the bottom between them, Purdue, and UCLA. So um, that's probably the fourth win that they could get this season. But yeah, not looking good for Indiana at all this year. Iowa, number 25 ranked. I think they could get 10 wins this year. I really do, just looking at the schedule. Um, pretty easy to start. Then they go play Ohio State, and they're just going to get steamrolled because Ohio State's defense is really, really good, and we don't know what this Iowa's offense is going to be like. So, but after that, I mean, it's a pretty easy schedule. Although I will say, and we'll get to I won't spoil who I think could upset Iowa this year. But there's a team in the Big Ten this year that is going to be very, very underrated, and also the schedule definitely helps them. And we'll get to it on this, but Iowa does play them at some point this year, and I think they could get upset in that game and maybe drop down to 9 wins. But yeah, Iowa. I mean, the defense is fucking amazing. So yeah, I think about 9-10 wins is right around where Iowa's going to sit this year.
Yeah, I could see them getting 10 wins. I could see them dropping, especially the one to Ohio State. That's pretty much a guaranteed they're going to lose that one. Like, yeah, it's just a matter of how long can the defense contain the offense before, the brakes fall off their offense.
Yeah. Moving on here, Maryland. They're 7-5. Which is probably right around where I'd put them at. They don't have the most favorable schedule ever. I mean, they play UConn to start the year, and then they play Michigan State, who, I mean, that could be a toss-up game this year, if I'm being completely honest here. And then they play Virginia, who I think Virginia is going to be, they're going to be pretty fucking bad. So Maryland's probably going to win that. And then looking at the rest of the schedule, it doesn't get hard until, the last, 4 or 5 weeks of the season where they have a gauntlet between Iowa, Penn State, uh, Oregon, and USC at some point. So I could see Maryland, winning, at the very most 8 games, but they're probably going to win. They're probably going to go 7-5 this year. And they've been the definition of mid in the Big Ten since they've joined it. Really, I mean, they haven't had a terrible season since they joined the Big Ten, but they haven't had any good seasons either.
Yeah, I feel like it's that Michigan State game for me on whether or not they're 7-5 or 8-4. Because like it is, it's early in the season, and like I hope Michigan State, as a state fan, I really hope they are better than the years previous. But I don't know. I don't really have hope for them. But I could just be a doomer and not really see any positivity for them. But yeah, I think 7-5 or 8-4 is a good spot for Maryland.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot. And we'll go to Michigan State here because they're next alphabetically. I think Michigan State realistically, they can go 6-6 this year. They have an upgrade at quarterback with Childs. Smith is a really good coach, proven coach. He brought Oregon State from a joke of a team to relevance the last few years. And Michigan State is, I mean, it's a top 25 program when you look at revenue and when you look at attendance, when you look at just the program as a whole. It is a top 25 program in the country, just based on, like I said, the revenue, attendance, things like that. And they have donors willing to spend money for players. And I feel like Michigan State this year, they're gonna surprise people. I think I don't think they're gonna go anything less than 6-6. They're gonna be bowl eligible this year. I can damn near guarantee you that, unless Smith just decides to be the worst coach in the world somehow, which I just don't see. I don't foresee happening. I think Michigan State's ceiling is 7-5, but I think their floor is 6-6. So they very tight window there for MSU. And if I'm an MSU fan, to call this a successful season, you make a bowl game. That's kind of how I see it. Is for as a Michigan State fan, I think a successful season for you guys is 6-6 at the bare minimum.
Yeah, I'm looking at the schedule, and outside of, the gauntlet of OSU, Oregon, Iowa, Michigan, 4 consecutive weeks, I see a ceiling of 8-4, and then a floor of 6-6, with the two potential games they lose being to Maryland and Rutgers. Just because, it's Michigan State, they'll find a way to lose to Rutgers. Other than that,
Yeah, it is possible they could lose to Rutgers there, but I don't see how Michigan State goes anything less than 6-6. I don't see how they lose 7 games. Like, just looking at that schedule, on top of the upgrades that they had this offseason, in terms of coaching and in terms of your quarterback, I don't see how Michigan State loses more than 6 games. I just really, really don't. Um, it would have to take a miracle, literally, for Michigan State to lose more than 6. I mean, I just don't see how. I just really, really don't see how. So moving on here to Michigan, obviously I said earlier they're 8-4, 9-3 team at the very best. I know for a fact they're losing to Texas, they're losing to Oregon, and they're losing to Michigan State. Not Michigan State, Ohio State. They, I believe they do play USC this year. Do they?
they do.
Okay, that is going to be a toss-up game, and that's where I think would be their fourth loss. If they were to go 8-4 this year, but I mean, other than that, I mean, you got Fresno State, you got Arkansas State, Minnesota, Washington's going to be garbage this year. And then, yeah, Indiana, Northwestern, So at the very worst, Michigan's going to go 8-4 this year. And to me, it's a successful season as a Michigan fan this year is 9-3, and we make the playoffs. Like, I don't care if we do shit in the playoffs as long as we make the playoffs. I think that's fine. Anything less than 9-3, though, in my personal opinion, is a failure of a season. But I really can see them going 8-4 this year. I think that toss up with USC is the only. But we'll see how USC is after the first few weeks of the season, and then I'll kind of adjust my thinking on Michigan's schedule or their record this year, I should say. But yeah, I think 8-4 at the very very minimum for Michigan this year.
Yeah, I think 8-4 as a floor is very good. Because yeah, like you said, that USC game is a potential toss up. They're all but guaranteed. Yes, they're playing Texas in Michigan. In Ann Arbor. But I don't know. I don't think they'll hang with Texas. Yes, they're hosting Oregon in Ann Arbor. I think Oregon's a better team than Michigan. And then they go to Columbus for the last game of the season, and that one will do all the explaining for itself.
Yeah, there's no way Michigan's beating Ohio State this year, and there's no way they're beating Oregon. Texas, I feel like Michigan could upset Texas just because I don't think Texas, if they have, it's been a very 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 long time. But I don't think Texas has ever played in the Big House. So and the Big House is one of the toughest places to play in. Um, I saw earlier this year before college football 25 dropped out. They did a top 25 toughest venues to play in as a road team, and Michigan State was at like 24, and then Michigan was, I believe, number 9 in terms of visitors playing there, how difficult of a place it is to play there. And I feel like that might trip up maybe Oregon and Texas both, but I just think Oregon. I think both those teams are just way too good to beat or to lose to Michigan this year. And like I said, Michigan has nobody returning except for 3 starters. And yeah, so and we don't even know who the fuck Michigan's quarterback is going to be yet because I've been kind of reading different writers in Ann Arbor, and one says this guy, one says this guy, one says this guy, and one says this guy. So we don't really fucking know what Michigan's gonna be this year. So, yeah, I think 8-4 at the very worst, but 9-3 at the very best. Moving on here, Minnesota. Yeah, this is gonna be a very tough year for Minnesota. I think the schedule looks very easy, but they just have fucking nothing. On both sides of the ball, their offense is bad, the defense is bad. Probably a 5-7 team, maybe 6-6 this year. They're gonna lose to Michigan, they're gonna lose to Iowa, they're gonna lose to USC, and they're gonna lose to Penn State this year. And they're probably gonna lose to Wisconsin. Wisconsin's actually going to be pretty good this year. They're probably going to lose to Rutgers as well. So I just it's so hard to gauge Minnesota, I think, this year. But yeah, I think 5-7, 6-6, 7-5, somewhere in that range. That's where Minnesota's going to finish this year.
Yeah, I can see a 5-7 season from them. So I don't really see much wiggle room for that. I don't see. I mean, maybe 6-6 if they beat Rutgers.
Yeah, I'm not. Minnesota's just not looking good this year, so it's gonna be very interesting. Now, this is the team here that I said might surprise a lot of people, and it's just because of their schedule and how easy it is, and that's Nebraska. If you play the schedule game with Nebraska this year, they very, very well could go 10-2 this year. And they could upset Iowa in the last game of the year. And that's the team I was talking about earlier, saying could upset Iowa. And it's just because Nebraska's offense is going to be pretty solid this year. And they're not going to be anything crazy. But I mean, just look at the schedule. Okay, look, you got UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana, and then OSU, UCLA, and then they play USC, which is probably going to be a loss. They'll probably upset Wisconsin, and they'll probably upset Iowa too. I mean, at the very worst, you're looking at 9-3 with Nebraska this year. Like, at the very very worst, you're looking at 9-3. Nebraska might be able to make it into the playoffs just because, yes, they don't have a lot of good wins on that schedule, but if they upset Iowa and Iowa's still ranked, they very well could see themselves in the playoffs as a 10-2 team.
Yeah, just simply based off schedule, I think you you're hitting the nail right on the head with the hammer there. They do have the potential to sneak in just based off schedule. Now, whether or not they perform and actually win these games, like who's to say they don't lose week 2 to Colorado? Who's to say they don't lose to Illinois, Purdue, or Rutgers, or UCLA and USC? So now all of a sudden they go from a 10-2 season. They lose 3 more games, and now they're looking at 7-5, and they're nowhere near sniffing the playoffs. So I feel like it looks pretty on paper. Whether or not they put it together in practice and actually execute is left to be seen.
Well, here's the thing, right? They did get better this offseason on both sides of the ball. We know, the coaching situation there is phenomenal. So, I mean, I don't see how Nebraska loses more than 3 games this year. I mean, like every team that they play outside of like 3 of them are gonna have losing records this year. It's just a fact. I mean, Colorado's gonna be dog shit, and Illinois probably a losing record, maybe a winning record, but I don't know. UCLA's going to be one of the worst teams in the conference. Illinois, Purdue, I mean not Illinois, Indiana and Purdue also straight garbage. I mean, they just on paper, everything says they should go 10-2 and 9-3. Like just that's what it looks like, and they should be a better team than they were last year. So I think they very much could execute this schedule and just sneak in to the playoffs because of their schedule.
Yeah, I think there's definitely potential, but I guess we'll just have to see on whether or not the committee will value all of those, supposed lesser wins.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. Northwestern, looking at the schedule, it's kind of like Nebraska in a way. I mean, they play a lot of shit teams. The only good teams that they play this year: Ohio State, Iowa, and Michigan. Those are the only preseason ranked teams that they play, but they're not playing a whole lot of good teams this year. I think they're going to end up with a winning record this year. I think the floor is probably 6-6, but I could see them going 7-5 just based on this schedule as well. And they don't play a whole lot of tough teams either, and they don't have to play Nebraska either. So that's a positive for them. So yeah, I think Northwestern could be a lot better this year just because of their schedule, but they could also be completely shit this year because, I mean, they haven't done really much of anything this offseason. So it's just going to be very interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, I feel more comfortable probably with Nebraska than Northwestern having a better season, but I don't know. I think outside of Iowa, Ohio State, and Michigan being losses for Northwestern, I see Maryland and Wisconsin being added, and maybe Illinois. So I can see up to 3 more being added. So 6-6 isn't that bad.
No, and I think Maryland's probably going to beat them. Wisconsin too, but Illinois, that's kind of a toss-up for me, I think, between them. And it can go either way. I think Illinois is probably going to eke that one out, though. So, yeah, probably 6-6 is probably what we're looking at for Northwestern here. Moving on to the number 2 ranked team in the country, that is Ohio State, 12-0. Actually, no, wait. They play Oregon in the regular season, so 11-1. I think they dropped that game to Oregon. Or actually, I take that back. They're gonna beat Oregon in the regular season, and then when they play each other in the Big Ten championship game, they lose to Oregon, so they go 12-1. But yeah, Ohio State they're going to the playoffs. They're gonna make a deep run into the playoffs. Don't know about a natty, but definitely a deep run into the playoffs for Ohio State.
I say Oregon beats them twice. This game is at Oregon.
That is a good point. I forgot. Yeah, that
Taking
the
Oregon
yeah.
in the
I'll
Big
I'll
Ten
I'll I'll
championship.
take Oregon in both those. I'll take you up on that. So yeah, Ohio State what would that put them?
They have an 11-1 regular season.
Yeah, 11-1. So 11-2 record overall.
In the Big Ten championship.
Right. I still think Ohio State's going to go deep in the playoffs this year. Because
I can agree.
they
Just don't meet up with Oregon.
well, the thing is, the way that bracket works out, if they're both still number 2 and number 3, uh, I don't know. They'd still probably face off against each other at some point, but I think Ohio State could go 13-0. I think they have the potential to beat Oregon twice, but at the very least, they're losing that regular season game. Now that I realize that it's in Oregon, they're losing that regular season game. Now, down here in Indianapolis, when they play each other, it's possible. It's possible they win that game. But, Ohio State, I mean, they'd have to miss the playoffs in order for this to be a failure of a season, and I don't think they're going to miss the playoffs at all. But moving on here to the number 3 ranked team in the nation, that would be Oregon. And we kind of brushed on this already with our thoughts with OSU. You know, they could very well go 13-0 into the playoffs, and they also could go, 11-2 in the playoffs with 2 losses to Ohio State. So we really don't know. I'm gonna say they're gonna go 12-1, just like I did with Ohio State. Who knows which one they're gonna win and which one they're gonna lose there? But I think right around 12-1 is where both those teams are gonna finish this year.
Yeah, I do agree. I think whoever does win the regular season matchup will lose in the eventual Big Ten championship matchup, barring a surprise season from Michigan or Penn State. That Penn State manages to upset Ohio State. Penn State manages to have an undefeated season. Barring a miracle like that, I believe we're going to see Oregon and Ohio State in Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, I think we will, and we'll move on here to Penn State. They're number 8 in the country. They play Ohio State this year. It's in Happy Valley. That might be the whiteout game, and if that's the whiteout game, Ohio State might lose that game just because Happy Valley is. I mean, when I saw that ranking, Happy Valley was ranked, I think, like number 7 in the country for like hardest places to play in. I would put Happy Valley at number 1, or at the very, very least number 2. Especially when you have that whiteout, because I mean, you remember it was quite a few years ago now, but it was a whiteout game. Michigan was playing at Penn State, and Michigan had to call a timeout before the first snap of the game because it was just way too fucking loud for anyone to hear Wilton Spate snap the ball. Like, do you remember that?
Yeah, that's not a good look for your team when you're taking a timeout before the first snap of the ball because
Yeah.
it's that fucking loud. Like, Happy Valley is an NFL stadium in college football.
Yeah, I mean, it really, really is.
Loud as
It is one of the hardest places to play in, and if that is the whiteout game against OSU, look out Buckeyes to get upset there. I think Penn State, though, this year you're looking at bare minimum a 9-3 season. I think, but I don't see them going more than 10-2. I think really their only losses that they will have this year, unless it's the whiteout game and Penn State can pull it off, would be Ohio State and maybe USC. But Penn Penn State's defense is going to be phenomenal this year. So, I think, I mean, honestly, we might see Penn State go 11-1 in the regular season, because they don't play anyone else really that tough, except for USC at some point outside of Ohio State. So I mean, it's possible Penn State could be really really good this year, and that's just because of the schedule that they play. And the team is basically unchanged from last year, outside of a couple losses on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, Penn State's primed to be good this year, and the schedule works out really, really well for them as well. So I think they could. I think they will be a playoff team for sure. And like I said, at the bare minimum, they're 10-2 this year in the regular season.
Yeah, I was gonna say 10-2 is probably a good bet. Like they may lose to USC, or who knows, Wisconsin may come out of nowhere and upset them.
And it's possible Wisconsin can do that. And that's why I say too, like USC is kind of just a toss up because we don't know what they are gonna be yet. But yeah, I just don't see how Penn State goes anything less than realistically 9-3, but I don't see them going less than 10-2.
Yeah, I'd say 10-2 is probably more favorable than 9-3.
It's a lot more favorable. I mean, the schedule is so super super favorable for them, and like I said, if the whiteout game is against OSU, look out. Moving on here, Purdue, 2 wins, maybe 3 this year. That offense is fucking pitiful. I mean, it's not going to move the ball at all. And the defense has nothing going for it. And the schedule, while it looks pretty easy on paper, I mean, you only have really 3 tough games between Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon. They also play Notre Dame, so yeah, that's automatic 4 losses right there. But I just feel like everyone else on their schedule outside of basically Indiana State and Indiana and Northwestern, they're gonna lose to. Like I really do not see how Purdue's even gonna beat Michigan State this year. And it's just such a Purdue's just gonna be so bad this year. Like at the very best, they're getting 3 wins this year. Like I just don't see anything more than 3 though.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can maybe potentially see them stealing one from Illinois, but I definitely only see about 2, 3 with Indiana and Indiana State being them. So they go 2-1 in teams against Indiana, losing to Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think they're going to lose to Oregon State. I mean, yeah, Oregon State is fucking nothing now, but yeah, just Purdue's going to be so fucking awful this year. So awful. Rutgers is next up on the list here, and I could see them going probably about 6-6, maybe 7-5. The schedule's fairly favorable for them. The only preseason ranked team that they play is USC. Michigan State's going to be kind of a toss-up for them, I think. But, I mean, yeah, the only losses I'm really looking at on the schedule would be Virginia Tech, Washington, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and USC. Everything else is kind of a toss-up for Rutgers here. So maybe 5-7, but I don't see anything less than that, and I really don't see anything more than 7 wins either.
Yeah, barring them really shitting the bed, I don't see anything less than 5-7. But I think 7-5 is a really good ceiling for them as well.
Yeah, it's just not necessarily a favorable schedule, but it's not a bad schedule either. And they're playing a lot of just mid teams this year, so it's going to be big toss-ups for them all year. UCLA is next here, and like I said, with Purdue and Indiana, I mean, it's a race to the bottom with them. They play LSU in week 3. That's going to be a loss already. They play Oregon later on in the season, Penn State, and then USC. They don't have a very favorable schedule. The offense is horrible. They have no one on defense. I mean, 4 wins at the most, and it's possible they could have the worst record in the Big Ten too. I mean, if they get upset by Purdue and Indiana, I mean, it's very possible they have the worst record in the Big Ten come the end of the season, just because they have nothing. No coaching, no offense, no defense. I mean, UCLA is a joke of a program right now, and it's a shame because just a couple years ago they were so good, and now they have no one, and it is kind of a shame, but it's just the way it goes sometimes in college football, and yeah, it's going to be a race to the bottom with them for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see more than like 3 or 4 wins on this schedule. Like outside of the first 2 games, Hawaii and Indiana, I see those probably going to UCLA, and then they have LSU, Oregon, Penn State. Like those are all probably losses. And then Minnesota, Rutgers, and Nebraska, Iowa, Washington, USC, and Fresno State. They can maybe steal one of those, but I am not very confident in them in doing so.
No, and I think Nebraska and Northwestern are better teams than UCLA, and they're not necessarily great teams. I mean, Nebraska, I mean, is the best out of those two that I just mentioned. But yeah, I just don't see how UCLA is gonna. They're not prepared at all for the Big Ten, and neither is this next team, which is USC. They're ranked number 23 in the nation right now. They play Michigan this year. They also play LSU week 1. That's going to be a loss. Wisconsin might give them a run for their money, and then they play Penn State later this year. Washington, they're probably going to beat. And then Nebraska could upset them. I mean, it's very possible. I doubt it, but it's possible. And then they play Notre Dame later on in the year, and that's going to be, that's the season closer. And Notre Dame is going to be fantastic this year. And we'll talk about Notre Dame whenever we do the ACC, because I mean Notre Dame is a de facto ACC team at this point. But yeah, USC. I mean, I don't see them going more than 10 wins this year. But there's so many question marks. I can't really put a number on where they're going to finish this year. I'm going to say probably 8-4. To be kind of realistic, but again, they're the biggest team, I think, with the most question marks going into this year, and we'll see just how much Caleb Williams was carrying that team very, very fast within the first couple weeks of the season for sure.
Yeah, I'd say they have a ceiling of 8-4 and a floor of 6-6 for me if they get upset by Nebraska and Wisconsin.
I think I think their floor is probably 7-5. I think realistically they probably go 8-4, 9-3, and their ceiling is 10-2 because I mean they don't have a super tough schedule, and I think it's possible they could upset Michigan this year because again we don't know what Michigan's going to be either, but we really do not know what USC is going to be this year. I mean we have a good feeling what we know Michigan's going to be this year, but we have no idea what USC this year, and like I said, we'll find out come week 4, week 5 after we've seen what the offense and defense can do. But we already have a feeling the defense is going to be just as bad as last year. So, but it's really going to be, how the question is how much was Caleb Williams really carrying that team? I think.
Yeah, I think that will be the question, and I think it'll be answered very soon in the season.
That it will. Then, lastly, the last addition to the Big Ten, second last team here is Washington. Obviously they are moving to the Big Ten, and they lost Kalen DeBoer. They had a good team last year, but they've kind of lost a lot of pieces this year. We don't know what the new coaching is going to be like. Washington could very well be a very, very average team this year, around 7-5. I think the schedule is favorable. The really only tough games that they have this year would be, USC, Iowa, Penn State, and Oregon. And I think they can. I think it's possible that they beat both USC and Iowa, but I think they dropped one of those 2 games, but everything else looked very, very favorable. They do play Michigan too, so I think that's probably going to be a loss for them. So, at the very worst, I think they're 6-6 this year. At the very best, 8-4. It's just kind of how Washington I think is going to be, but I think they're going to sit right around that 6-6 though.
Yeah, and so I think that floor of 6-6 is a pretty good floor, but I really see 7-5. Like I think USC
Yeah,
probably will beat them. I don't. It just depends. Will Iowa have the offense?
yeah, and that's kind of a big question mark for Iowa. I mean, we know the defense is going to be good, and Washington's offense is definitely going to struggle against that. But maybe if Iowa's defense or offense is so bad, maybe Washington can at least keep themselves in the game and pull off the upset there. But uh, Washington has a lot of question marks this year, and I mean, like I said, they're nowhere near as many question marks as USC, but um, definitely a lot of question marks for sure. And then last but not least, we have Wisconsin. Um, I think their floor is 7-5. I mean, the schedule is pretty easy, especially to start the year. I mean, yes, they have Bama in week 3, and then they go to USC, which I think they could upset them. And then they also play Penn State. They're probably gonna lose that, and then Oregon and Iowa. Everything else is very very easy for them on the schedule. I mean, you got Rutgers and a couple other just very mid teams. I believe they play Indiana and Purdue, which I think those are automatic wins this year, just because how bad those teams are. I see their floor being 7-5, and I think that's actually just where they're gonna sit. I just don't see them going more than 9-3 this year. I don't think they're ever going to get ranked unless they pull off some crazy upsets against a Penn State or an Iowa. I mean, outside of that, I don't see Wisconsin being more than 9-3 and ranked. Like I just don't see that happening. I think probably 7-5 is where Wisconsin's going to end up finishing.
Yeah, I'd say 7-5 or 8-4 is probably a comfortable place where I'd put Wisconsin. I feel like they have a better chance of upsetting USC than they do Iowa, just because of Iowa's defense.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Is we know USC's defense is going to be shit, but and that's why I think Wisconsin at least might have a chance against Iowa if the offense doesn't improve. Um, but yeah, I just I don't know with Wisconsin. I think 7-5 though is probably where they're gonna sit, but Iowa, man, Iowa's throwing such a big wrench in a lot of these predictions because we don't know what the offense is gonna be like. We know what the defense is gonna be like, but and that's the thing with this just looking at the schedules here is how good is Iowa? And I know seeing that number next to their name makes you think they're probably really going to be a really good team this year, but you have to be cautious because that offense is fucking horrific. So yeah, I don't see how Wisconsin goes anything less than that 7-5, but it is possible they go 6-6 and they get upset somehow somewhere, but I just don't see it. Wisconsin's going to be a very interesting team to watch this year just because the schedule's pretty favorable and the team's not bad, but it ain't good either. So, it's just going to be very interesting for sure. With that said, guys, rate, review, subscribe, help us out. Let us know what you guys want to see. We're back full time Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we're getting into the flow. Football season is so close. Week 0, I believe, is next week. Thursday's episode, we're gonna get into either the ACC or the Big 12. We'll figure that out. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you guys on Thursday.